Hello. Well, round two goes to the unknown respiratory virus. Here I am again, recording asynchronously for our UW course here. Today we are going to be focusing on the statement of purpose. That is our sole focus for today's class. Last time we kind of oriented around the PhD application in a more complete sense, stepped through all the elements of UW's own grad school application, and we spent a little more time talking about two particular parts of it, one being the CV and the other being letters of recommendation, and in particular, who to request them from. So what I've tried to emphasize along the way thus far is that this is a very important item for your grad school application. And most, although not all, of the essays that I receive do reflect that. In fact, I think that this might be one of the more important things that you've ever written. And so this a document gives you a chance to explain to admissions committees what it is that you want to do next and long term in your scientific career, and why you've chosen those directions. And this is a good chance to try to get across your motivation as a developing scientist, to to let them know that you're intellectually enthusiastic about this research area, and that you know what research is about and it's gone well for you. And of course, this is a chance to demonstrate your writing skills as well. And this is an important determinant of career success in many scientific careers. Including, being a PhD student. So it's a chance to, to show that you can present your thoughts in a well-organized way, and to convey them very, very clearly and coherently in high quality writing. So what am I looking for when I am assessing statements of purpose in my own admissions work? I have mentioned that we put the following questions on our program website, our page for prospective students under how to apply, because I noticed at some point along the way that I got some essays that just didn't have what we were looking for. And so I realized that often it just came down to how good is the advice that you receive about preparing this. And although I know that not everyone is going to read it, I figure, well, it's the least that we can do to actually have this information online, so that it's there if people do in fact look through our guide for prospective students. And so the first question that I asked there, and expect people to address, is what is your personal motivation to become a geneticist? So this is a genetics PhD program, but you could swap in whatever your intended target program might be. And, this is a question that you could take in a lot of different directions. You could draw on your life experiences. You could draw on your particular fascination in this field, whether it comes from coursework, from research, or otherwise, or other experiences. You can, bring up your highest goals for yourself in life, and how a career in this area would contribute to them, either your goals for yourself or ways that you want to contribute to society. There's a lot of ways you can take this. And the next thing I ask is, what makes it clear that you will thrive in a research PhD program? So this tends to be, a lot about your past research experience, how research has gone for you, how you've realized that it's something that you'd be glad to do a lot more of, what you've learned from it so far, but more broadly, how can you convey the qualities, in ideally a not too boastful way, but how can you show rather than tell, people that you have the sorts of qualities that would be associated with with success in a research field. So, not just endless intellectual fascination, but the sort of dogged persistence that it takes to keep going with research projects when you've had a lot of frustration. A lot of applicants make sure to let us know that they understand that research can often be frustrating. That's one of the more common elements that I see, actually, in this sort of response. And anything else that you can think of. It can also be, your skills working with others, because that's very much a part of modern science, and your communication skills. Of course, you're showing that in one sense through presenting a well-written statement, but what is it that shows that, I guess, both research is for you, and that you have a range of skills that will make your PhD study successful. And kind of related to that, I specifically ask, what have you discovered and personally gained from your past research experience? And by discovered, on one hand, that does refer to, like, okay, what have you actually done and found in your research projects? And I still do get, multiple statements a year in which it's clear the person has done research, but they don't see fit to actually say anything meaningful about it in their statement of purpose. But, to be clear, you should. And I don't know if this is always obvious, but you should. It is a strong expectation that people have when reading your statement of purpose, is that you take this opportunity to show that you can individually do a good job of describing one or more research projects that you've had a leading role in. And so, we'll talk more about what that looks like, later in today's session. But, in terms of saying personally gained, I guess this is also an invitation to, to just explain what you have learned about research, and what has that done for you as a person? What has it meant to you to be involved in research? And how has that informed your career goals, and your broader outlook? So again, there's different ways you could take this, but you should definitely spend a chunk of your statement talking about your research experience, both in terms of the specifics of the project, but also, this sort of bigger picture connection as well. And then I want to see applicants, give a clear statement of what it is that they might like to study in grad school. And we've kind of covered that whole topic. The way that I put it is, I want you to kind of get it down to a subfield. So, like in this context, like what area of genetics would you like to most likely focus your research on? So you want it, you want it to narrow in on, a part of this graduate program that you're applying to, but you don't want it to be so impossibly narrow that there would be very, very few faculty who could plausibly advise you on it there. And as I'll mention later on, this is, this is also an opportunity to mention specific faculty there who you might like to work with. That is something that you should do. And more broadly, why is this program the right fit for you? And there's different ways that you can attack that too, both on the research side and in terms of academics and professional development. You can utilize things you learn from the material that they put online. And I'm going to step through each of these things in further detail, really. So one thing I think can be a challenging aspect of the statement is just, where do you even start? How do you, how do you craft an entry point for this big, important document? And, find a balance between getting people's attention in a positive way, but, not getting so exotic about it that it's distracting. What do you start with? And, I think there's various ways that you can potentially lead in. One, is just kind of a big picture, matter of fact sort of approach, in just sort of outlining, why you want to become a biologist of this type. You can kind of lead with your thesis statement in that regard. Another approach that I've seen people use reasonably effectively is to actually start with a rather specific memory or experience that illustrates something about their motivation to become a biologist of this type. And so it could be an experience that really awoke their intellectual fascination, or it could be something that highlighted an important social need that they want to address in their career. So just trying to, use that specific vignette as an entry point to convey motivation can be a good thing. And it is okay to start specific. It is okay to even start with a memory rather than an overarching statement. But I would just say, don't get too carried away. As I put here, you're not writing a movie script here. You don't want, you don't want, your exotic writing choices here to kind of steal the show. You want to keep the focus on who you are, and your motivation and your background. One question, another, of these questions that I think do not have a right answer is, how personal do you want to get in your statement of purpose? I've seen very divergent approaches here. I've seen statements that are very effective and that, are what I'm calling here purely professional, that manage to convey fascination with the field, or, convey the fact that they really love research, without really, going anywhere outside of their academic and research experience. That can work. And I've also seen statements that get more personal than you might imagine. I've seen statements that, step through the pain of, losing a close loved one, maybe to a particular disease. I've seen statements that talk about, being shut off by their family, who refuse to embrace their identity. And so why would they even do that? You might wonder. Well, in some cases, this can be an important part of their journey that they want to convey. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying personal stuff has been effective in every case that I've ever read, not necessarily. But in some cases, it can be a part of, building the narrative of, why they want to do what they're setting out to do. And also, building, up the idea that, that they have certain qualities, that we're required to persevere in the face of challenges like these. So that they have shown the same sort of resilience in their personal life that they're going to need in research, and that they're not going to, give up when things don't go right. So, again, this is not something that needs to happen in your essay. And it may be that different approaches are advisable for different individuals. But I wanted, just to highlight that, this whole span of styles is actually pretty common among the statements that I look at. And I would say, some specific admissions reviewers might prefer one way or be drawn to the other. But I don't think that, I don't think any approach in this spectrum is necessarily a bad idea, as long as it's accomplishing, the points that I'm outlining here. But there are probably some challenges that, you might want to consider a little bit more carefully. I could see this either way. But, let's say, if you have had major struggles with mental health, this could cut different ways. And so you might either choose to include that or not to, depending on your priorities. Because, I think it's fair to say that, a large share of faculty have dealt with, with mental health challenges, in their own graduate students or others that they've worked closely with. And they realize that these issues can have a very large impact on the ability of a student to make the progress that they need to in a graduate program. And so, it's fair, I think, to expect that, that if the text of a statement, implies that this is a potentially ongoing concern for a student, that might actually scare some prospective advisors. On the other hand, you might also feel like, I want to work with someone who is aware of this and supports me anyway. And I'm going to let this scare away whoever it's going to scare. I'm going to let this, convince any program that would be worried on this grounds, even if it led them not to interview me. I want to make sure I'm entering into an environment, that is supportive, where I can, be as open as I prefer to be about this issue. So, I'm pointing out that, this is something that, you just have to think about in terms of your own, priorities and choices for how to handle, this sort of issue, or any issue where, where it might, uh, lead reviewers to ask, to what degree does this issue potentially impact, this applicant's prospects for success in a demanding PhD program, or how long it might take them, or anything like that. So, what should you include in your statement? I know this was kind of heavily foreshadowed by the list of questions that I outlined. One thing to include is your personal motivation. So this is kind of, like, I don't know, maybe the way that I usually imagine statements going, I think it may often make sense to lead with something of this sort, even if you kind of return to your goals toward the end of the statement as well, in a more concrete fashion. And so, I mentioned that your motivation to become this type of biologist can come from all different places. And wherever that is fine. But, trying to convey that in some way can be definitely beneficial. Really, try to really express your passion, I would say. And, I emphasized earlier that, there should be also a substantial description of your research experience, and, something that convinces people that you are serious about, about signing on for a research intensive PhD program. And you should also, of course, explain why you're interested in this particular program. And so these last couple of points, I will go through a little bit more in turn. So how should you talk about your research experience? Well, I would recommend starting with kind of a big picture framing. Now, one thing that's always important is to remember that your audience is way less immersed than you are in your research project. Don't assume that they understand anything about it at all, really. You might think, well, they know so much more than me about this field, so of course they're going to know about, gene X and organism Y. No. You need to, you need to spell out the motivation for your project, and make it clear, what question you're asking, and what the goal of your study is, why that's important. So start with the big picture, make them care. And then you can talk about more specifically what you did, and, why, that methodology makes sense. You could talk about what you did individually, and it may be as part of a broader project, and that's fine. But hopefully you can spell out at least one kind of area of the project where you took a leading role. And then you can talk about, your results, and how you interpret them, and how it relates to the initial hypothesis, and why these findings again are important. Now that you're talking about the results, why is that significant? What could it lead to down the line, and so on. And throughout this, of course, you would ideally want to be writing this in a way that doesn't sound like you're writing about something you'd rather not. You want to be writing this in a way that tells people, I'm excited about this project, and I'm excited to be telling you about it. So, that's the kind of tone that you want to strive for. You don't want to go ridiculously over the top and, make them doubt your sincerity, but, you want to convey your natural passion for this research. And like I indicated in one of the questions that I led with, I think it's always a good idea to talk about, what you learned and what you gained from this, deep dive into the research process, and how that has reinforced your scientific interests and your career goals. Now, in some cases, applicants have been involved in multiple research projects, either in the same lab or in a different lab. And so in this case, it can often make sense to focus on one key project in greater detail. It might be the most recent project that has reached a satisfying stage of fruition. And then, if you've done that, if you've shown that you can describe even one project in, a deep and satisfying way, then it's fine to mention the others in a somewhat briefer context. You don't have to describe every project you've ever been involved with in equal levels of detail. It's kind of a show you can do it sort of thing. But yeah, in other cases, maybe for whatever reason, it does make sense for a particular applicant to spend, similar weight talking about 2 or 3 different projects for whatever reason. And that could be all right too. The next part, of course, I mentioned that I expect applicants to, to be able to articulate, which area of biology they would like to focus on going forward as they enter a PhD program. So I've been emphasizing what I call the subfield level. And, so spelling out which area it is that interests you most and why you're so drawn to this area. Again, this is another great opportunity to convey your scientific passion. And so, in terms of the scope of the area you identify, again, it should be broad enough that there are multiple faculty from this program who could fit that profile. Maybe several different faculty could theoretically work, but you don't want it to be so broad that, many of the faculty in the entire program would be equally relevant, because that might, come across as, someone who's not really refined their interest to the extent that they ideally would prior to graduate school. For someone who, even for a rotation program, is going to have to come here soon enough and choose just 3 labs out of, in our case, 80 something options to rotate in. And although this might seem very obvious, I've learned that it is not always the case in statements that I read. So the the specific faculty from this program that you mentioned interest in working with should actually do research within the subfield that you are highlighting. And in other contexts, I've mentioned that, when I say a subfield, that can be an area that captures the interface between 2 different parts of biology. That is totally fair game. So looking at the intersection between 2 fields is different than talking about their union. So someone who's who says that they want to do microbial genetics, well, as long as they're not making it sound like they want to do anything microbiology or anything else genetics. If they're saying they want to work on the genetics of microbes, that's great. So that is it's fine to be cross-cutting that way, and in fact that can help to kind of express your refined interests. It should just narrow it down, in general, to the degree that I'm talking about here. So you should also talk a little bit about the program that you're directing this application to. And so this might be the point at which you may need to start tailoring your statement a little bit from one program to the next. So there might be a block here, in the latter portion of the statement where, you need to tailor the text to each program that you're applying to. And part of that would be program specific content. So, before you talk about specific faculty from the program, what draws you to this program more broadly. And it is fine to talk about, in a more general sense, the research strength that this program has in this research area that you've outlined. But there might be other program attributes that, you feel would be relevant to mention as well. It might be, something you've noticed from the curriculum of the graduate program and the courses that are available. It might be something that they've mentioned about the professional development opportunities that they make available to their graduate students, or, aspects of their philosophy of graduate training that are clear from the materials that they present. Or it might be, other experiences, like, it might have to do with interactions you've already had with people there in part. And then it does make sense to also mention specific faculty that interest you the most. And, I still receive multiple statements every year that do not mention any faculty from our program. And that is certainly a disadvantage. It's such an easy thing to do. And yet, if you don't do that, then it may seem as if you haven't really taken a close look at this graduate program, and you may leave people wondering who it is you'd really like to work with there. And none of that is positive for you. And for each faculty member that you list, I'd say it's good to I'd say write at least a sentence about each of them, in terms of why their research interests you in such a way as makes it clear that you actually know what their research area is, and that you haven't just randomly chosen 3 to 5 names off of their list of graduate program faculty. Because occasionally I see a statement where it looks like that could have been done, as far as I can see from the statement. And so that is my, my overall suggestion is to mention, maybe 3 to 5 faculty from that program. Make it clear that you have more than one potential home in terms of labs there. So that is kind of what I recommend putting into the statement. Beyond that, I would say, that this is a document that really makes sense to pay attention to the writing itself. One thing that I coach our reviewers to think about when they read statements of purpose is the question, would I want to write a paper with this student? Like, to me, as a potential faculty advisor in some cases, that is a very important question for me to consider. If I take someone on as a PhD student, it's with the hope that I will be writing a few papers with them, papers that they're taking the lead on drafting largely. And, what sort of writing do I want to have to go through and work with them on? It's very time consuming for me as a faculty member to help new students really learn the ins and outs of writing a good scientific paper, even if they are a decent writer to begin with. And so if I get the impression that they may not be a decent writer to begin with, then I might want to stay far away. So the first thing I would suggest here is to make sure that your statement has a logical structure. I have definitely read statements where it seems like, like they're talking about A and then B and then C and then A again and then C again. Why do that, right? Make an outline before you just start writing words on your digital page here. And so, and as you're outlining, think about whether this is the most logical and effective organization for the statement that you want to write. There isn't really just one organization that is best, but it should make sense. It shouldn't, skip back and forth all over the place. And when you have written a draft statement, I think it can really help for you to go back later and critically evaluate it. That is one way to try to catch gaps in the completeness of your explanation, or otherwise, clarify any fuzzy sections of text. If you write something and then read it again immediately, it will seem perfectly sensible in general, I think. But if you come back later, with kind of a fresh mindset, then you might see places where it could be improved. Of course, we're going to have, some built-in peer feedback opportunities very soon here as well. And after that, instructor feedback. But it still helps to have things in the best place that you can. And the other thing I would say is just that, given how important this document is, spend a little time actually checking it over. And that can mean using, everything from like, spell check and other word processing tools to reading it over yourself. The word processor will not complain if you put the wrong university's name in this version of your statement. And every year I get statements that have the wrong university's name or the wrong program's name in them, believe it or not. It happens not that infrequently, and you can kind of understand why. I mean, people are preparing multiple versions of their statement for different programs. At the same time, it still doesn't come across that well, to not be catching a mistake like that. And it's just such an easy thing to double check. So make sure you've got, the right information in the right statement, the right university, and the faculty who actually go with that program, that sort of thing. I don't have a whole lot to say about formatting your statement of purpose. It can be a pretty normal looking word processor document. In fact, I wouldn't suggest trying to get too cute about that. You don't need to make this look like it's in a magazine or something. There's not really much need to use images, color or otherwise. I would let your words do the talking here. And what I would say is just try to make it as easy to read as you can. Keep in mind that reviewers are looking through a lot of applications. Be easy on their eyes if you can. And, although it's not the worst thing in the world to have a single spaced statement to read, when you've got 100 of them, it does get a little tougher. So, I would suggest to use something maybe like 1.25 or 1.5 line spacing. Just make it a little easier for our tired eyes to follow along. Use a normal sort of font size, especially not too small. And this may seem like kind of a crazy detailed thing, but I figured I'd mention that there have even been studies suggesting that some fonts are psychologically received differently than others. And so like there was even a study where, like they sent out New York Times articles to random people that were the same article, but written in different fonts. And then they asked to what degree people agreed or disagreed with the article. It actually depended on the font that it was written in. So like, Baskerville here was the best of the ones they tested. And maybe not a huge surprise, but Comic Sans was not deemed to be the most reliable seeming in that study. So in other words, don't write your statement of purpose in Comic Sans. Probably none of you are going to do that anyway, but just thought I would mention. In terms of the overall length, I would say, I would say that I would normally expect a statement of purpose to be more than 1 page long. I would expect it at least goes into the second page. If it's only 1 page long, it's possible that it could be decent, if it's kind of dense, single-spaced text. But that might often signify there's not quite so much here. On the other side of the spectrum, I don't really want statements that just go on and on, given the number that I have to read either. And so I appreciate it if somebody can wrap things up at least within 3 pages. So, that's the target that I would suggest. In some cases, you might encounter page limits. I can't speak to that directly, but it is a possibility. So that might be something to look ahead to. Lastly, I thought I would mention a little bit about what I end up faulting statements for most frequently. Because I have my old notes from scoring applications in any given year. So when I didn't like a statement, why was that usually? One common thing is that I'm faulting the research description. Either they didn't really give a meaningful research description, or it stopped at a very superficial level of detail. Like they might just say that they did a project on this topic in this lab, with maybe at most just like a sentence about what they did. So I'm definitely looking for something more substantial than that. The other thing that I sometimes feel after reading a research description is that this person is doing fine in terms of telling me some of the details of their project, but they haven't really helped me to understand, the big picture of like, what's the important question that we're asking here, and why is this work important? And when I'm looking for future PhD students, not just future lab technicians, I'm looking for people who are thinking in these big picture terms. People who are going to make these intellectual connections, people who can do more than just execute a research project, people who can, be involved in the whole scientific process, from coming up with ideas for new projects, to following through with them, and understanding the meaning behind them. So, I like to feel like I'm dealing with this sort of person when I read a statement of purpose, not just someone who's competent at executing a project. I often still see statements where I'm not super clear on what it is they want to do. Like, in our case, what area of genetics really interests them. And maybe they've mentioned a few faculty and I can try to connect the dots there, but it doesn't always come together that clearly. Occasionally, well, not that occasionally, actually. So UW allows applicants to apply to up to 3 programs for the same price. And some applicants make ample use of that feature to tack on a program or two that is not that well aligned with their primary research interests. Now, if they want, they can upload a separate statement of purpose to each program, but it's clear that some don't. And for those reasons or others, I do sometimes see statements that lead me to think, well, they've let me know what their interests are, but I would think that those interests might fit a little bit better in this other program than in ours. So that could be an issue as well in terms of fit and the likelihood of that student ultimately being interested in our program versus another at UW. And I mentioned that, I do also get some statements that don't mention any faculty associated with our program. And that is, a negative. And the other related issue to what I was just talking about is that I sometimes get statements that list a few faculty, but only some of them are actually affiliated with UW's genetics program. And so that's something to kind of keep an eye on as well. So that is not a positive thing either, in terms of understanding the structure of our program and who is involved with it, even though I realize that can be challenging on the applicant side. And lastly, I do sometimes note when a statement is just not well written. And I've mentioned different ways in which that can be the case, ranging from the organization to the clarity of the text to specific errors in it. Again, would I want to write a paper with this student? So that's what I've got for you on the statement of purpose front. For next class, our big assignment is due. Your statement of purpose is to be turned in before our next class in its initial draft form. And I am going to post shortly here some instructions for exactly how to do that by submitting a link to a Google document that you have created, to submit that link through Canvas. And I emphasize here not to be late on this because, as soon as next week's class is done, I am going to assign your statement to 2 other students to review, and I'm going to assign 2 others' statements to you. And that doesn't work super well if they're not all in. So seriously, have them in on time. And the other reason for that is this is worth a lot more points than most of our assignments. And so if there's a late penalty on that, it makes more of a difference. And so again, for next week, having that draft in is your assignment. For the following week, your assignment is to provide feedback, and I will provide further instructions about that. You'll be providing that as comments in the Google document of the person that you are reviewing. or you'll be making a copy of their document basically, and putting comments on it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're headed. So this is getting into, you know, the real heart of our class here, you know, and we're really digging in on the statement of purpose because of its importance in this whole process. So, you know, I need you to really dig in with me over these next few weeks, so that we all get some really good outcomes out of this whole process. All right. I will see you next time.